Well, this morning we're joined by two gentlemen. Mr. Bayo Rotimi, he's a financial consultant. He's here, as well as Mr. Muda Yusuf, who is a DG Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much.
Well, what the speech was by the president, longer than usual. Many thought, oh, okay, there are different components of this bill. So there are those who thought that, well, the president had to combine the speech that they were waiting for on that inauguration day, May 29, with this one. So you Nigerians, you want the speech? Here is the speech. But let me start with you, Mr. Muda. What was your impression of that speech?
Well, very comprehensive and touched quite a number of areas. And just as you said, we are complaining that we didn't have a speech. Now we have a very long speech. So it's good. At least it touches quite a number of areas. Of course, in a speech like that, you don't expect too much of details. Because if you are talking from an economic perspective, it's not enough to just talk about something. You know, you want to see the context in which you want to deliver it. And that is what will help the ability, how far you can rely on what is said. Because the experience we have had in this environment is that making good speeches is one thing. Having good documents is one thing. You know, having the right kind of impact or outcome is a completely different matter. So we have learned to be very cautious in celebrating speeches, or celebrating documents, or celebrating policy. These things are important because ordinarily they should be a pointer to where you are going. But most times there is a very big variance between what is said and what happens. So we have learned to reckon more with what it is done. What is done, the framework for delivering it, and all of that. What are the basic assumptions and all of that. And of course, in a speech like this, you don't expect to see much of that. But generally, from a political point of view, it's a good speech. If we wanted a speech, we are seeing it.
Political? Political point of view, you say?
Yeah, there's political economy, bro.
Yeah, of course.
Mr. Rotimi,
talking to us.
Some have opined, Mr. Rotimi, that this speech inspires hope. How much of that do you agree?
I think, as DG has said, talk, they say, is quite cheap. What is critical is the action that follows or the action that precedes. So we have a new beginning, a second term of 4 years. It's always a good time to review the past 4 years. Nigeria had a plan, an economic recovery and growth plan that was supposed to span 2017 to 2020. So it becomes easy to pick up that document, to look at the promises, to look at the deliverables, and actually assess how many of those things have we achieved. Are we on the path to a 7% GDP growth rate, which is the 2020 target? We closed 2018 at 2%. So, talk is one thing, but the people of Nigeria will measure this government, this administration, whether at the federal, state, or local government level, by the quality of what they deliver and how they impact on their lives as individuals. So I think that really is the critical issue.
You said it's a good point to review what we have done and what, if you marry where we are coming from with this speech, and do you see any progress going forward?
Well, the president has touched on quite a number of areas. He spoke about bringing 100 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years. So to an extent, he clearly recognizes that the level of extreme poverty that is prevalent in Nigeria has become a clear and present danger. There are security implications. The whole nation is on edge. People are concerned about even traveling from one state to the other And all of this has an impact or has a foundation in the level of poverty that is prevalent and is increasing. So those are the issues. So he spoke about that, and I think that is certainly one area that it would be nice for government to say over the next 4 years, this is what we are going to do to actualize these lofty goals that Mr. President has put out there.
So let's look at some parts of this speech now, because we know that the poverty clock every second is ticking. And it says that Nigeria will have the highest amount of poor people in the world right now. So in the 31st paragraph, the president's speech, he says, in face of these challenges, our government elected by the people in 2015 and re-elected in March has been mapping out policies, measures, and laws to maintain our unity and at the same time lift the bulk of our people out of poverty and onto the road to prosperity. Now, the next paragraph says, this task is by no means unattainable. China has done it, India has done it, Indonesia has done it, Nigeria can do it. These are all countries characterized by huge burdens of population. Two different things. First, the population bit, which we'll come back to, because in fact they're even associated with that. And then when he says these countries have done it and Nigeria can do it, does that suggest to you that the president is saying that we will do it, or just saying, well, if they do it, we can do it? So can we take it to say that this is the target that the government wants to achieve in the next 10 years or thereabout?
Well, we can take it as being the target or the aspiration that the government has. But it is one thing to make reference to countries that have done it. It's another thing to create the environment for you to do it. You know, of course we can do it. Why not? But whatever we will achieve will depend on the kind of strategy that we have put on the table. Now, if you are talking about poverty, you cannot divorce poverty from investment, because you need jobs to alleviate poverty. And you need investment to create jobs. So what is happening to investors? You know, I mean, you have to look at what investors are facing policy-wise, some cross-sectoral policies, some sector-specific policies. How far are we addressing those policy issues? I mean, if you speak to people who are in oil and gas, for instance, they will tell you what they are going through in terms of policy. We have been tinkering with PIB for almost 15 years.
Is it a problem of policy or execution?
No, it's a combination of both. I mean, you have a policy first before you begin to talk of execution.
But what is
it's very bad if you don't even have the right kind of policy.
But in the same breath, the president also says, for the past 4 years, having been elected in 2015, we've been mapping out policies to lift people out of poverty.
You see, at this time, you should not be talking about mapping out. You should be talking about what you have delivered, actually. Because it's not, this is the second time we are going into. Actually, the emphasis should be more on, okay, we have done this, we have taken this, you know, that kind of thing. It's supposed to be a scorecard. And of course, you now tell us what is going to happen in the next phase.
So, Mr. Rotimi, it won't be out of place if the speech had said, well, having seen these countries and what they've done, well, this is the amount of people we have brought out of poverty, no matter how big or small, and predicating this plan on that plan, we can move forward. So do you think that is equally a missing link?
I think that clearly, as was mentioned earlier, in the course of his speech, it is difficult to cover all of the areas. But what we expect to see is shortly after the speech, right? Well, we don't have a cabinet now. If we had a cabinet, we would expect that a certain minister should come forward and distill that high-level conversation into practical, actionable, measurable steps. So the president talked about countries that have pulled their people out of poverty. So maybe over the last 40 years or so, China has pulled almost 1 billion people out of poverty. In the last 10 years, maybe India has done close to 300 million. The question is, what did those nations do? What steps did they take? How many of those steps are we taking in Nigeria? You know, China's resurgence, China's transformation was largely driven, like DG mentioned earlier, investments. They created a market-friendly environment that attracted foreign direct investments. They had liberal trade policies. So essentially, private capital came into that country, and the transformation is what we're seeing today. Over 1 billion people, or about 1 billion people over a 40-year period. So maybe government needs to say to us, in the next 4 years, these are the concrete steps. Okay, ERGP is coming to the tail end. Let's have a new plan. Maybe we did not quite score an A+ the last time, but let's come up with a new plan and let's put some energy behind it this time around.
Let me ask you, let's go back to the script. Paragraph 36 says, we now have witnessed 8 quarters of positive growth in the economy, and our GDP is expected to grow by 2.7% this year. Well, that's definitely way below what is expected, but in which way, if this is true, or can you confirm, let me just ask you, can you confirm or refute that claim?
Well, 8 quarters of positive growth, I need to do a double check on that. I know that our economy has been growing, and I know, unfortunately, the growth rate has been below target. But I think the critical challenge we face is that we have a population growth rate that is in excess or exceeds the rates of the economic growth. So when you have more people, we're giving birth to easily 5-6 million people every year. You know, when we talk about poverty, these are some of the drivers of poverty. You have a population growth rate that is excessive, that is certainly in excess of economic growth. So there will always be a lag. There will always be a lot of people who are poor. So yes, we did come out of recession, our first recession in 25 years. And from then up till now, actually, Mr. President is correct, we have been making consistent GDP growth, but the growth has been marginal. So it does not impact on the man on the street and the woman on the street.
And if I may just add to that.
But add to that, this comment that says that because the larger population of the people in the poverty bracket are more in the rural areas, and I think that's what is intended to be addressed in paragraph 39, where he says we will take steps to integrate rural communities to the national economic grid. I wonder what that means anyway.
You see, when we talk about some of these macroeconomic indicators, we should realize that the economy is about people, ultimately. It's about people. Some of these conditions are necessary, but they are not sufficient to deliver the impact on people. So when we look at this, we should be looking at how inclusive is the process. If you have a GDP growth, it is positive. We should interrogate the inclusiveness of the growth. Because this has been an ongoing conversation over the years. Because if you have a growth that you have anchored largely because there is some improvement in oil price or oil output, that is not inclusive enough. We talk also about some macroeconomic indicators like foreign reserves and all of that. If that is also driven largely by oil, we are not getting anywhere with that. It may give some comfort. And if you also interrogate some of those numbers, there is also a large content of foreign portfolio inflows that are also part of these reserves. We just raised some funds, Eurobond and all of that. All of these things are part of it. So if you have any small shock in the oil and gas area, either globally or something goes wrong, this economy, all these fundamentals will be completely dislocated.
Does that mean that all the efforts that government claims to have been making, in diversifying the economy are not yielding desired fruits?
There's no result, no concrete result yet. Now, if you look at the structure of the GDP, agric is contributing about 23% of GDP. Try and check the productivity in agriculture. It's still very low. Over 80% of the active players in the agricultural sector are still the smallholder farmers. You don't have much of commercial agriculture. You don't have much of technology in agriculture. You don't even have the connectivity. Because you made reference to issues of rural areas and on the...
Yeah, that's
where's
actually...
the connectivity?
That's actually...
Because the economy is also about how well connected all the various components of the economy is.
So what key things should they be focusing on as opposed to just relying on this oil reserve, the growth in the oil sector, which is not inclusive?
Well, what we should be looking at, first, we have to be better focused in terms of our industrialization. The way to get value from an industrialization policy is to focus on what you call resource-based industrialization. In other words, if you have a sector, maybe an industry, you should be able to link that industry to a lot of people within the economy. People who are supplying one raw material or the other. You have very significant what you call multiplier effect. When your industrialization strategy is dictated by the resources that you have around you. And it's also a function of what is the local content in the process. I mean, if you take the oil and gas that you talk about now, I mean, the refineries haven't worked for how many years now? If the refineries were working, you know the kind of impact it will have domestically, in terms of the multiplier effects on the economy, in terms of the reduction in the imports of petroleum products. Because no matter what we say, the importation of petroleum products into this economy is still one of our biggest problems. In terms of pressure on our foreign exchange reserve, in terms of all the transparency problems that you have around subsidy and all those issues. But over the past 4 years, there has not been any significant change in that area.
Now, Mr. Rotimi, he also spoke about it's not just the federal government that can do these things. The states have got to be in on this as well. He says, well, they can come up with some sort of revenue drive, go for investment drives. How do you think the states can function in this?
We have a capacity problem. A lot of our states today, if they were a company, they should have been wound up by now. Because they are not generating sufficient independent revenues to sustain themselves. So it means that they have to depend on centrally generated revenues. Now, so I recognize that for this poverty alleviation target to be achieved, all the tiers of government, have to play their own active parts. But I also believe that the federal government can set the tone. We're in a unique situation where the states are entirely reliant on federal institutions and the federal government. The federal government in the last 4 years consistently bailed out the states to carry out basic functions such as paying salaries. It's disgraceful, but that is the reality. My sense is, let the government use that kind of leverage to force better behavior. So if you are going to access a bailout fund, then there are terms and conditions. You must show me an economic blueprint that shows how you will move from being this subservient, dependent entity to a financially stable one in the next 4 years. And as you move closer to the achievement of that target on a 6-monthly or annual basis, then you get access to some of these bailout funds that you need. So we need to hold everybody accountable at federal, at state, at local government level. But the bottom line is this: across the tiers of government, there has been gross underperformance. You know, DG was talking about industrialization, but you cannot have industrialization when basic infrastructure does not exist. We're still struggling with power generation. We're still struggling with transport infrastructure. So those industries that need to get critical raw materials, the roads from the farmsteads to the factories, the roads are bad. The road from the factory to the marketplace is bad. So my view is this: over these 4 years, government needs to do something radically different. Let there be an increased focus on social infrastructure by government. Invest in education, invest in healthcare. Then the hard physical infrastructure, create a framework that allows private sector capital to come and fund those areas.
But just a minute, how much policing can the federal government do concerning, for instance, the bailout funds, or if it's budget support funds? They usually interchange those adjectives to qualify what they give to the states. Because you have the state houses of assembly who are supposed to perform certain functions to ensure that these corporate governance questions are answered. But if they are not performing those functions, what can federal government do?
Well, unfortunately, in practically all of the states, the governors are almost absolute dictators. They are not accountable. They ride roughshod over the state houses of assembly, over the local governments. So their word is almost law in most of the 36 states of the Federation. But like I said earlier, because there is still this significant dependency on the federal government, it is that dependency that the federal government should use as leverage to moderate their behavior. It will take a while. It's not an instant cure, but we can gradually start moderating the behavior and say, look, I want to see a budget that is focused on funding primary health care in your states. If you increase from 5% to 10%, then you will have access to this kind of federal funds. You will have support from the federal institutions in one way or the other. I'm just thinking that it's time to try something different because the old way is not working.
Let me ask you.
Now, let me just add this. You see, when we talk about the role of the states, we need to address the issue, in addition to what he has said, the issue of fiscal federalism. Because unless you run this country as a truly federal state, you continue to have this dependence of the states on the center. Because if you have a true federal structure, there will even be better incentive for states to perform. I mean, take a typical investment in any state. As a state governor, you struggle to bring an investor to your state. The VAT that is paid by that company is going to the center for everybody to share. The company tax that is paid by that company is going to the center for everybody to share. The education tax that is paid by that company is going to the center for everybody to share. And so many other things like that. So where is the incentive for people to even work harder to ensure that you have more investment in the state? So we should have a situation where some of these resources in the states, there's a relationship between what you do as a state and what you also get from it.
Okay.
You have a mineral resources in your state, for instance, you cannot do anything unless you get a license from the federal government.
Concerning the point you raised before we went to break about what happens if one raises or investor comes into a state, pays VAT, it goes to the center, everybody shares it. What should we do about that? How should that be addressed?
You know, there have been this conversation about restructuring. Although restructuring means different things to different people. But the sense of what I'm saying is that there should be a correlation between the effort you put in to generate investment in your state and the revenue you get from it. There should be a correlation between the economic activities that are taking place in your state and the amount of returns you get from it. Let me give you an example. If you go to Ogun State, go to Agbara axis. There are so many industries there. If you see the quality of the roads there, most of the industrialists there are lamenting how to get even their raw materials to their factory. Just the whole premises, the whole environment. Now, of course, they are in a particular state. But how much can the state do? When almost 80% or even 90% of what they pay as tax, either import duty, VAT, company tax, education tax, everything is going to the federation account. Where is the money to take care of these investors?
I get your point.
And these investors also generate what you call externalities. A lot of negative externalities.
But from a financial and business perspective,
yes.
Much as I get your point, but what would you do if you were a governor? Would you rather just wait for the federal government to come and do it, or you fix the road and then pass the bill and say, well, government, this is how much you owe me for investment purposes, because those companies have got to survive.
They have to survive. But I don't know how well that model has been working. Because I've heard some states complain about how much the federal government is owing them. They have fixed federal rules.
Yeah, I understand some of those bills are being attended to.
Quite a lot of these things. But what is important, because the president didn't address that, we cannot be running this country with a unitary model of governance. That is important, because, you talk about the states also doing something, the local government do something. Yeah. If you continue with this kind of structure, there's very little they can do. Of course, I take the point he made about issues of accountability and all of that. It's also a very big issue at the states. But there's also this issue of the totality of the structure of governance. Okay. We need to decentralize it somewhat.
Let me bring Mr. Rotimi in on this, because this population, just a minute, because he said, we have a bulging youth unemployment rate, 23.63%. And we also know the importance of data in what we do. But how is this does this encourage one? Because if he says a database of poor and vulnerable households is being carefully built based on age, gender, disability, educational levels for proper planning in this administration's war against poverty. And then he says a database of unemployed but qualified youth has also been developed under the National Social Investment Program. It goes on to say, for which it can be used by both the public and the private sector. How encouraging is this, or otherwise?
Well, I think data gathering is never a bad idea. You need data, you need information to be able to plan. So starting from even the population census, there is a reason why people are enumerated across gender, across age categories, demographics, all of that. Because we need to be able to, government needs to be able to come up with specific policies that address the particular requirements of the different segments of the society. So there is no problem in data gathering. What is imperative now is that, okay, has the process been concluded? What is the outcome? What are the specific policy initiatives that we are going to deploy to address those issues? So youth unemployment, that one we already know. We're talking about double digits, 23, 25% youth unemployment, if not more, right? So we already know that this is a clear and present danger. Some of these people are educated, either to university level or secondary school. To what extent can we start to deploy the potential that these people have that is currently dormant? And the longer it remains dormant, the more they become available for destructive activity, crime, and all of the insecurity we're talking about. So the question is, what are the specifics? We talk about a social investment program. Every year for the last 4 years, 500 billion naira is voted for that. In practical terms, how much has been spent on a year-on-year basis? I will be surprised if in the entire 5 years or 4 years, 500 billion has been channeled into this sector. So it's not enough to make a grandiose plan. what we must do is we must break it down to bite-sized chunks, bring in partners, if you need to, from private sector, and let us start to deal with these issues frontally.
Talking about breaking it down and bringing in partners, item 34 says with leadership and a sense of purpose, you know, dovetailing into the earlier question, we can lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years. Jump to 42 says we are revived to work collaboratively with state and local governments, legislators, the diplomatic corps, and all Nigerians to tackle the challenges ahead. Do you see this as some kind of collaborative strategy to work together? To how can we achieve this, taking 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in 10 years?
I think the first question, or one question that we have not properly addressed is, if our population continues to grow at the rate that it is growing, in 10 years' time, what will Nigeria's population be? And even if by then you have taken 100 million people out of poverty,
how many will still be?
Absolutely. How many will still be in extreme poverty?
So the growth could make no sense of that plan if we don't do something right about it.
So we must focus on this issue of population control, population management frontally. I know, you know, there are religious and all manner of connotations around managing populations, but government must take decisive steps. We must engage with all of the critical stakeholders, the religious leaders, the traditional rulers, and all of that. We need to find a way to manage this thing because it is already out of control, and something needs to be done.
Okay.
Well,
but the collaborative, sorry, they just quickly address that one. I think, Mr. Yusuf, I'll take it to you. How can these governments, federal, state, local governments really work together to help us deal with this major challenge of poverty?
Well, before I take that, let me just add a few things to this population thing. In the speech, the president also was like celebrating the fact that in another couple of years we'll be the third largest, we have the third largest population in the world. And he was, in a way, alluding that to at least bringing us to greatness. But I think we need to emphasize, we already have the population. We are talking about managing the growth. But even the one that we have, we need to ensure that we have population with quality. Otherwise, these things will come back to haunt all of us. We have seen what the neglect of investments in education, investment in human capital, we are beginning to see the consequences now. Because some of the security problems we are having has relationship with the fact that we have neglected investment in people. And this is already getting out of hand. So there's a correlation between this security problem, investment in people, human capital development, security, and all of that. So these things are also very key. Now, we are talking about issues of collaboration. Of course, I mean, there are platforms. We have the National Economic Council, where they have the VPs, chairs, all the state governments are there. I mean, they discuss issues on how to work together as states, between the states and the federal and all of that. A lot of platforms exist. We have the Governors Forum. We have all sorts of forums. I mean, we have even dialogue between the private sector, the public sector, and all of that. What is important is to take the inputs from all these components and take them seriously. Because what we have seen over years is that sometimes those are the leadership positions don't get the right kind of feedback so as to what is happening on the ground.
As we wind down now, what would you like to see and how soon, if they factor in all of these things that you say, in terms of the improvements or whatever plan or program materializing, how long should it take? What would you want to see?
Well, we don't have time. And we have to, because we are already in a kind of emergency situation. Given what is happening around security, around unemployment, around poverty, it's an emergency. So we have to hit the ground running. And we have to ensure that all the stakeholders that have something to contribute, either to policy formulation, to policy implementation, to institutional development, to reform, to political reform and all of that, we need to bring them on board and take very sincere and honest advice and get the right kind of feedback on the impact of some of the policies that we have.
Any timeline for these things to kick off?
How much time do we have? I mean, we have to start immediately. How much time do we have? Before you know it, the 4 years will be over.
I know we don't have the minutes as yet.
We don't have the time. So we have to start immediately.
I think it is, I agree, we're in an emergency situation. The time to start is yesterday. I think that whilst we're implementing or seeking to implement policies that can transform the lives of Nigerians, Nigerians should also continue to hold government accountable, particularly in a lot of the areas where there is significant wastage. The cost of governance, the cost of running government is still way too high. You can't spend 70% of your revenues on maintaining the government infrastructure. So whilst we're delivering or trying to deliver on the things that will transform the economy over the long term, in the short term, let this government make a commitment to us that 4 years from now, we would have brought down the imbalance between recurrent expenditure at 70-something% and capital expenditure at 30%. We would have brought it down to some more respectable number. If we can achieve that, the savings from that can go into social infrastructure, education, healthcare. Let's bring down the cost of running government by 20-30% and see whether or not we may not see that transformational impact that we're looking for.
All right, that's a place to leave it. Mr. Bayo Rotimi, financial consultant, and Mr. Muda Yusuf is the Director General for Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on this morning.
Thank you.